The blood-red sunrise spilled across the eastern horizon as Harlow Newman clutched her father's letter to her chest, the stage coach rattling beneath her like bones in a coffin. Snowflake, Arizona Territory, 1886, her final destination and last hope after losing everything back east. 10 minutes to Snowflake, the driver called down, his voice barely carrying over the thunder of hooves and creak of wooden wheels. Harlow smoothed her travel-worn dress, a once fine garment now dulled by days of dust and discomfort. At 22, she had never imagined she'd end up here, in this wild, untamed corner of the country. Boston's carefully ordered society had been her home until typhoid took her mother and financial ruin claimed her father. His desperate move west to rebuild had left her behind, finishing her schooling. Now, 3 years later, his letters had stopped coming altogether, replaced by a single notice from the local postmaster that her father had passed and left his small ranch to her. The stagecoach lurched violently, sending Harlow against the opposite seat. Outside, endless expanses of sage and juniper stretched toward distant mountains, dusted with lingering spring snow despite the punishing June heat. "Hold tight," the driver shouted as they careened around a bend, wheels skimming dangerously close to the edge of the narrow road. The stagecoach slowed as they approached a settlement that seemed to rise from the dust like a mirage. Snowflake was smaller than Harlow had imagined, a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest like a finger pointing heavenward. Horses stood hitched outside the general store, and a few townspeople paused to watch the stage roll in. "Snowflake Station," the driver called, bringing the team to a halt in a cloud of dust before a weathered building marked "Stage Depot" in faded letters. Harlow collected her carpetbag and stepped down onto Arizona soil for the first time, her legs shaky after days of travel. The dry heat struck her like a physical force, sucking moisture from her skin. She swayed slightly, light-headed from the journey and the altitude. "Miss Newman." A tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached. "Sheriff Mills, your father's attorney asked me to meet you." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, accepting his offered arm as her legs threatened to buckle. "I confess I'm rather overwhelmed." "Natural enough. Come along to Mr. Perkins' office. He's handling your father's affairs." His gaze softened. "I was sorry to hear about Thomas. He was a good man." Harlow nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Sheriff Mills escorted her down the dusty street, past curious onlookers who made little effort to disguise their interest in the newcomer. Harlow felt their stares. A woman alone was rare enough in these parts, but a clearly Eastern woman was practically an exhibition. Mr. Perkins' office sat above the town's only bank, accessed by an external staircase that Harlow climbed with careful dignity despite her exhaustion. Inside, the balding attorney rose from behind his cluttered desk. "Miss Newman, welcome to Snowflake. I wish it were under better circumstances." He gestured to a chair. "Please." Harlow sank gratefully into the offered seat. "I appreciate your assistance, Mr. Perkins. I'm eager to learn about my father's property." Perkins exchanged a glance with the sheriff. "Yes, well, there are some matters we should discuss. Your father's ranch, Whispering Pines, lies about 5 miles outside of town. It's small but promising, 30 acres with a modest cabin, barn, and corral. A few head of cattle." "That sounds manageable," Harlow said, though in truth she had no idea how to run a ranch. Her education had prepared her for society life, not frontier survival. "There's something else," Perkins continued, shuffling papers. "Your father had debts not insurmountable but significant. The ranch needs work to become properly profitable." "I have some savings," Harlow began, though the journey had depleted much of it. There's also the matter of water rights, Sheriff Mills interjected. The neighboring ranch owner, Isaiah Kincaid, controls access to the main creek that feeds your property. There's been a dispute. Harlow straightened her spine. What kind of dispute? Kincaid claims your father diverted water illegally. Your father claimed Kincaid was blocking his rightful access. Perkins removed his spectacles. It's become rather heated. I see. Harlow's mind raced. She hadn't expected to walk into a property conflict on her first day. And this Mr. Kincaid, is he reasonable? The men exchanged another look that sent a chill down Harlow's spine. Kincaid's not unreasonable, Sheriff Mills said carefully. Just determined. He came here 5 years ago, built the Double K into the largest spread in the county. Doesn't take kindly to what he considers trespass. But he won't cause trouble for a woman alone, surely, Perkins coughed. Miss Newman, perhaps we should discuss your plans. Many women in your position would consider selling and returning east. Harlow felt a flash of indignation. This ranch is all I have left of my father. I intend to at least see it before making any decisions. Very well, Perkins sighed. Sheriff Mills can take you out tomorrow. For tonight, Mrs. Hollister at the boarding house has a room prepared. By the time Harlow settled into her Spartan room at the boarding house, her head was pounding with fatigue. The widow Hollister had been kind enough, if curious, serving a simple but hearty dinner, and showing Harlow to a clean, narrow bedroom under the eaves. Sleep came fitfully, dreams of rushing water and faceless men on horseback disrupting her rest. She woke before dawn, her nightdress clinging to her with sweat despite the cool night air. Something felt wrong. Her throat burned and her limbs seemed weighted with lead by the time Mrs. Hollister knocked on her door with breakfast. Harlow could barely rise from her bed. Lord have mercy, the widow gasped, pressing a weathered hand to Harlow's forehead. You're burning up, child. I'll fetch Doc Simmons right away. The day dissolved into a haze of pain and confusion. Doctor Simmons arrived, a kindly older man with spectacles and capable hands. He examined her thoroughly, his expression growing more concerned. Miss Newman has contracted mountain fever, he announced to Mrs. Hollister. It's not uncommon for newcomers. The ticks carry it. Will she recover, Mrs. Hollister asked, wringing her hands, with proper care. But she'll need weeks of rest, and there may be complications. Harlow tried to speak to ask what complications, but her voice emerged as only a raspy whisper. The doctor bent closer. Don't strain yourself, Miss Newman. The fever sometimes affects the vocal cords. Your voice may be compromised for a time. Panic welled in Harlow's chest. Her voice gone. How would she manage? How would she defend her property against this Kincaid person? Sheriff Mills should inform Mr. Kincaid about Miss Newman's condition, Dr. Simmons said to Mrs. Hollister. He should know she won't be taking possession immediately. Kincaid's not likely to wait forever, Mrs. Hollister replied darkly. That man's been trying to absorb the Newman place into his ranch for 2 years. Harlow wanted to protest, to demand they take her to her father's ranch immediately, but darkness crowded the edges of her vision, pulling her back into fevered dreams. Days passed in a blur of heat, pain, and confusion. Harlow drifted between consciousness and delirium, aware of Mrs. Hollister's cool compresses and Dr. Simmons' twice-daily visits. She tried repeatedly to speak, but her voice had vanished completely, leaving only a painful rasp when she exerted herself. On what Mrs. Hollister told her was the 5th day, Harlow was lucid enough to sit up and take some broth. The fever had broken, but weakness pervaded her body and her voice remained absent. Dr. Simmons provided a slate and chalk for her to communicate. The fever has temporarily damaged your vocal cords, he explained kindly. With rest, Your voice should return in a few weeks. A few weeks. Harlow's heart sank as she scrawled on the slate. What about my ranch? Sheriff Mills has been checking on the property, Mrs. Hollister assured her. Though I heard Kincaid's men have been moving cattle onto your north pasture. Harlow's hand trembled as she wrote, I need to go there, doctor. Simmons shook his head firmly. You're far too weak for travel. Another week of bed rest, minimum. Frustrated tears welled in Harlow's eyes. Each day she remained bedridden was another day this stranger encroached on her property, her inheritance, her future, her only chance at independence. On the morning of her 8th day in Snowflake, Harlow woke to raised voices downstairs. She recognized Mrs. Hollister's indignant tone, though not the deep, measured voice that responded. Curiosity drew her from bed, wrapped in her dressing gown, to the top of the stairs. She's not receiving visitors, Mrs. Hollister insisted. Doctor's orders. I understand, madam, the man replied with quiet authority, but this concerns her property. Kincaid men are moving a herd into her east meadow today. Harlow didn't hesitate. She descended the stairs on unsteady legs, clutching the banister for support. Both Mrs. Hollister and the stranger looked up at her approach. The man removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and the most intensely blue eyes Harlow had ever seen. Tall and broad-shouldered, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to the saddle. Not a town dweller, this one. Miss Newman, he said with a slight nod. Isaiah Kincaid, I thought it was time we met. This was Kincaid, the man trying to steal her land. Harlow stiffened, wishing desperately for her voice. Mrs. Hollister thrust the slate and chalk into her hands. You shouldn't be out of bed, the widow fussed. Harlow ignored her, scribbling quickly. I understand you're trespassing on my property, Mr. Kincaid. His eyes, remarkable eyes, she had to admit, narrowed slightly as he read. Not trespassing, Miss Newman. Utilizing unused grazing land according to territorial water rights. Your father and I had an understanding. Another lie, Harlow was certain. She wrote, my father would never agree to surrender his land. Not surrender. Share. Kincaid's jaw tightened. Look, Miss Newman, I came here as a courtesy. You're new to the territory and clearly unwell. The cattle business doesn't wait for convalescence. Those meadows need grazing to prevent fire hazard, and my herd needs the grass. Mrs. Hollister made a disapproving noise. Isaiah Kincaid, you ought to be ashamed. This girl's barely recovered from mountain fever and can't even speak to defend herself. Something flashed in Kincaid's eyes. Was it guilt? It vanished so quickly Harlow couldn't be sure. He studied her pale face for a long moment. You've lost your voice, he asked, his tone softening slightly. Harlow nodded, hating the vulnerability of the admission. Temporarily, Mrs. Hollister added. Doctor says a few weeks, maybe longer. Kincaid ran a hand through his hair, clearly recalculating his approach. Miss Newman, I propose a solution. Allow me to show you your property tomorrow. You can see the situation for yourself, and we can discuss arrangements without the town gossips interfering. He glanced meaningfully at Mrs. Hollister, who bristled. Harlow hesitated. Was this a trap or genuine concern? Either way, she needed to see her ranch. She wrote, I'll go if Mrs. Hollister accompanies me. That won't be necessary, came Sheriff Mills' voice from the doorway. None of them had heard him enter. I'll escort Miss Newman myself. 10 o'clock tomorrow, Kincaid, the rancher nodded, settling his hat back on his head. 10 it is. Good day, ladies. With a final glance at Harlow that she couldn't quite interpret, he departed. That man, Mrs. Hollister fumed once he'd gone. Coming here bold as brass while you're still recovering. Sheriff Mills approached Harlow with concern. Are you certain you're strong enough for this outing, Miss Newman? Kincaid's not a man to be trifled with. Harlow wrote firmly, "I need to see my inheritance, and I won't be intimidated," the sheriff sighed. "Very well, but let's have Doc Simmons check you over first." The doctor reluctantly approved the excursion, provided Harlow traveled in a proper buggy rather than on horseback, and returned immediately if she felt unwell. She spent the afternoon resting and preparing, studying her father's correspondence for any mention of water disputes with Kincaid. She found nothing explicit, only vague references to neighbor troubles in his later letters. That night, Harlow barely slept, anticipation and anxiety keeping her awake. What condition would she find her ranch in? And what game was Isaiah Kincaid playing? Sheriff Mills arrived promptly at 9:30 the next morning with a rented buggy. Harlow had dressed in her most practical outfit, a navy skirt and white shirtwaist, with sturdy boots and a wide-brimmed hat to shield against the sun. She carried her slate, chalk, and a small notebook for more detailed communications. "Kincaid's a fair man in most regards," Mills said as they left town, following a rutted trail that wound through scrubby hills. "But water's sacred in these parts. Men kill over less." Harlow shivered despite the mounting heat of the day. She wrote in her notebook, "Why does he want my land specifically?" Mills glanced at her writing. "Your property has the best access to Whispering Creek. It's fed by mountain springs, runs all year. Kincaid's spread is bigger but depends on seasonal water. In drought years, whoever controls your land controls the county's most reliable water source." Harlow nodded thoughtfully. Water rights, then. Not just a neighborly dispute but a matter of survival in this harsh landscape. As they crested a hill, Harlow got her first glimpse of Whispering Pines Ranch. The setting was more beautiful than she'd imagined, a small valley nestled between rocky outcroppings, with a belt of pine trees along one side and meadows stretching toward a glittering creek. A modest cabin sat near the tree line with a barn and corral nearby. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. "Someone's there," she wrote, pointing. "Probably Kincaid," Mills replied. "Or he sent one of his men ahead." It was Kincaid himself who emerged from the cabin as they approached, looking more at home here than he had in town. He wore work clothes now, denim pants, a chambray shirt open at the collar, and well-worn boots. His expression was unreadable as he watched them pull up. "Sheriff, Miss Newman." He nodded to each in turn. "Welcome to Whispering Pines." Harlow stared at him, then at the cabin, her cabin by rights. What was he doing making himself at home there? "I've taken the liberty of starting a fire," Kincaid continued, noting her confusion. "Cabin gets damp without regular heating. Your father always kept it warm, even in summer." This casual mention of her father, as though Kincaid had known him well, unsettled Harlow. She hadn't considered that her adversary might have had a personal relationship with Thomas Newman. Sheriff Mills helped her down from the buggy, and Harlow took a moment to steady herself. The journey, short as it was, had taxed her limited strength. She pulled out her slate. "Show me everything," she wrote. Kincaid's eyes narrowed slightly, then he nodded. "We'll start with the cabin, then the outbuildings. The water issue is best seen from the north ridge." The cabin was simple but solid, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, handmade furniture, and shelves lined with books that brought a lump to Harlow's throat. Her father's presence lingered in every corner, from his pipe on the mantel to his handwriting in the ledger open on the table. "He kept meticulous records," Kincaid remarked, following her gaze to the ledger. "Your father was an educated man. Not many of those out here." Harlow nodded, running her fingers over her father's familiar script. She wrote, "You knew him well." A shadow crossed Kincaid's face. "Well enough. Neighbors out here rely on each other, even when they disagree." They moved on to the barn, where 4 horses nickered in greeting. Harlow approached them cautiously, allowing a chestnut mare to nuzzle her hand. That's Penny, Kincaid said. Your father's favorite. Been keeping an eye on the stock since he passed. You've been caring for them. Harlow wrote, surprised. Someone had to, Kincaid shrugged. Bert Jenkins comes by daily to feed and water them. I check in a couple times a week. This didn't align with the picture Harlow had formed of an aggressive neighbor trying to seize her land. She studied Kincaid's profile as he checked Penny's hooves, noting the care with which he handled the animal. The tour continued to the small corral, the chicken coop, empty now, and the tool shed. Throughout, Kincaid demonstrated a thorough knowledge of the property and its operations. Finally, they climbed a gentle slope to the north, where the land opened up to a view of the entire valley. There's your water issue, Kincaid said, pointing to where the creek entered the property from the east. Whispering Creek feeds both our ranches. My land, he gestured to the vast expanse beyond her northern boundary, gets water downstream from you. Harlow frowned, writing, so I control your water access, not the reverse. Kincaid's mouth quirked. In theory. But your father dammed the creek here. He pointed to a spot where the creek narrowed, diverting most of the flow to his south pasture. That left my southern grazing lands high and dry in summer. And you want me to remove the dam, Harlow wrote. I want a fair water sharing agreement. Your father refused to consider it. Sheriff Mills, who had been silent during most of the tour, finally spoke up. Thomas was within his rights, Isaiah. Riparian law works back east where water's plentiful, Kincaid interrupted. Out here it's different. We all need to share or none of us survive. The intensity in his voice made Harlow study him more carefully. This wasn't simply about business, there was something personal here. She wrote, Why did my father refuse? Kincaid's expression hardened. You'd have to ask him that. Obviously impossible, Harlow thought bitterly. She scribbled, I need time to think. This is all new to me. Fair enough. Kincaid nodded. But I need an answer soon. Summer's coming and that means drought. My cattle need water. I understand. Harlow hesitated, then added, Thank you for maintaining the property. Something softened in Kincaid's eyes. Your father would have done the same for me. Neighbors look out for each other, disputes aside. As they walked back toward the cabin, Harlow felt the day's exertions catching up with her. Her legs trembled and a wave of dizziness made her stumble. Before she could fall, strong hands caught her arms. Whoa there, Kincaid said, his voice close to her ear. You're not fully recovered yet. Harlow found herself leaning against his solid chest, mortified by her weakness but too dizzy to pull away immediately. His heart beat steadily under her cheek, and he smelled of pine and leather. Perhaps we should return to town, Sheriff Mills suggested, hovering nearby. Doc Simmons warned against overexertion. Kincaid didn't release her right away. You should rest first. The cabin's cool inside. He guided her to the porch and helped her into a wooden rocking chair. Sheriff Mills fetched water from the pump, and Harlow drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. I've been thinking, Kincaid said after a moment, leaning against the porch railing. You're in no condition to manage this place alone, even once you've recovered. Ranching's hard work for anyone, let alone a city woman. Harlow bristled, scrawling, I can learn, no doubt. But learning takes time and the ranch needs attention now. Spring planting, fence mending, cattle rotation. Kincaid crossed his arms. I propose a temporary arrangement. Let me manage the operational aspects while you recover. In return, we'll negotiate a fair water sharing agreement. Harlow narrowed her eyes. Was this a trick to gain control of her property? She wrote, and ownership remains entirely mine. Of course. It's your land, Miss Newman. I'm just offering practical assistance. It's not a bad idea, Sheriff Mills said thoughtfully. Temporary management until you're on your feet. Harlow considered. She had no experience with ranching and no immediate alternatives. If she rejected Kincaid's help, the property might deteriorate beyond salvaging by the time she was well enough to manage it. How long? She wrote, 3 months. By then you'll be recovered and have learned enough to decide your next steps. Harlow hesitated, then wrote, I want a written agreement, and I'll be checking on things regularly. Kincaid's mouth curved into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Newman. The ride back to town was quiet, Harlow lost in thought. Had she made a wise decision, or handed her adversary the advantage? Something about Isaiah Kincaid didn't quite add up. The supposed water dispute with her father seemed genuine, but his willingness to help her now contradicted his reputation as a ruthless land grabber. Kincaid's not what you expected, is he? Sheriff Mills asked, breaking the silence. Harlow shook her head. He's complex. Came here with nothing 5 years ago, built the Double K through sheer determination. Not always diplomatic, but honest. Mills glanced at her. Your father was equally stubborn. 2 men like that, bound to clash. By the time they reached town, Harlow was exhausted but determined. She had Mr. Perkins draft a management agreement that afternoon, specifying Kincaid's responsibilities and limitations. The document was ready by evening, and to Harlow's surprise, Kincaid arrived at the lawyer's office exactly at the appointed time, read through the terms carefully, and signed without objection. I'll ride out tomorrow to assess what needs immediate attention, he told her. Would you like to accompany me? Might be good for you to learn the seasonal operations. Harlow hesitated, aware of her limited strength. She wrote, Perhaps not tomorrow, I need rest first. Sensible. Day after tomorrow, then. I could bring a wagon, make it easier on you. She nodded, surprised by his consideration. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Every other day, Kincaid would arrive with his wagon to take Harlow to Whispering Pines. Despite her continued silence, he patiently explained every aspect of ranch operations, from breeding stock to crop rotation. He seemed to intuitively understand her questions from her expressions alone, often answering before she could write them down. Your eyes ask better questions than most people's mouths, he remarked one afternoon as they inspected a section of fence. They don't waste words. Harlow found herself smiling, though she quickly schooled her features. She couldn't afford to forget that this man had been her father's adversary. On her slate she wrote, Why did you really offer to help me? Kincaid stared at the question for a long moment. Complicated answer. Try me, she wrote, adding, I'm not as fragile as I look. No, you're not, he agreed, a hint of admiration in his tone. All right. Truth is, I respected your father despite our disagreements. When he died, I offered to buy this place at a fair price. The town council refused, said they were holding it for his heir. And you're hoping I'll sell to you? Harlow wrote, her suspicion returning. Kincaid's eyes darkened. I won't deny I'd like to purchase it eventually, but forcing you out isn't my style. I want a fair deal that works for both of us. But why the water dispute with my father? Kincaid sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his hair. That creek is the lifeblood of both our ranches. Your father's dam reduced my water by half during summer months. I proposed sharing alternate weeks of full flow. He refused. Harlow frowned. That didn't sound like her father, who had always valued fairness. She wrote, There must be more to it. There is. Kincaid's jaw tightened. But it's ancient history now. The conversation ended there, but Harlow's curiosity was piqued. What had really happened between her father and Isaiah Kincaid? As her strength returned, Harlow spent more time at the ranch, often staying from sunrise to sunset. Mrs. Hollister fretted about propriety, but Sheriff Mills or Dr. Simmons usually accompanied her. legitimizing the arrangement. Though her voice remained absent, she found other ways to communicate her slate for complex thoughts, and a developing system of gestures and expressions for simpler matters. Most surprising was how quickly Kincaid learned to read her face. He seemed to know, often before she did herself, when she was tired, confused, or skeptical. One afternoon, catching her doubtful look as he explained cattle breeding, he laughed outright. "You don't believe me. Those eyebrows of yours could interrogate a man better than any lawman." His smile transformed his face, crinkling the corners of those remarkable blue eyes. "Your father had that same look." The casual comparison startled her. Harlow pulled out her slate. "You see him in me." Kincaid nodded, suddenly serious. "More than you might realize. Same determination, same intelligence." He paused. "Same blindness sometimes." Before she could ask what he meant, a rider approached Bert Jenkins, who helped with the ranch. His expression was grim. "Mr. Kincaid, there's trouble at your south pasture. Some of Holloway's men are moving cattle across your boundary line." Kincaid muttered a curse, then glanced apologetically at Harlow. "Excuse me, Miss Newman. I need to handle this." To Jenkins, he added, "Get Miss Newman back to town, then meet me at the South Ridge." Harlow shook her head vigorously, writing, "I want to come with you. This could get dangerous. Holloway's men don't respect property lines or women. I need to understand all aspects of ranching, including this." Kincaid studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay behind me. If there's trouble, you ride straight to town. No arguments." They rode hard to the southern boundary of the Double K, where they found 4 men driving a small herd of cattle across a creek that marked the property line. Kincaid signaled for Harlow to stay back, then rode forward. "That's far enough, Holloway," he called to a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache. "You're on Double K land." Holloway spat tobacco juice. "Creek's low enough to cross here. Just taking my shortcut to town." "Your shortcut ends at the property line. Turn those cattle around." "Or what, Kincaid? You'll set your Eastern lady on me." Holloway nodded toward Harlow, who stiffened at the crude reference. Kincaid's voice hardened. "Miss Newman has nothing to do with this. Turn around, or Sheriff Mills will hear about this trespass." Tension crackled between the men. Holloway's hands hovered near his gun belt, and his companion spread out slightly. Harlow's heart pounded. Would there be violence? Should she ride for the sheriff as Kincaid had instructed? Before she could decide, Bert Jenkins and 2 other riders appeared on the ridge behind them, Kincaid's men, armed and ready. Holloway's bravado deflated visibly. "No need for trouble. Must have taken a wrong turn." "Must have," Kincaid agreed coldly. "See that it doesn't happen again." As Holloway and his men retreated, driving their cattle eastward, Kincaid turned to Harlow. "That's another aspect of ranching, defending your boundaries. Some men only respect strength." Harlow's hands trembled slightly as she wrote, "Would he have drawn on you, Holloway? He's all bluster." "But his men might have if they thought they had the advantage." Kincaid's expression softened. "You're white as a sheet. First time seeing the rougher side of territory life," she nodded, embarrassed by her reaction. "It takes getting used to." "But you handled yourself well, stayed calm, didn't panic." He studied her thoughtfully. "Your father would be proud." The simple statement warmed her more than it should have. They rode back together, Kincaid pointing out boundary markers and explaining territory grazing rights. By the time they reached Whispering Pines, the sun was setting, painting the landscape in gold and crimson. "Too late to return to town," Kincaid observed. "You can stay in the cabin. I'll bunk in the barn." Harlow hesitated, conscious of propriety but also of practical realities. She wrote, "Mrs. Hollister will have opinions." Kincaid's mouth quirked. "Mrs. Hollister always has opinions, but even she would agree it's safer than traveling those roads after dark. He was right, of course. Harlow nodded her agreement, and Kincaid sent Jenkins to inform Mrs. Hollister of the situation. That night, alone in her father's cabin, Harlow explored more thoroughly. She ran her fingers over his books, found his handwritten notes in the margins. In the bedroom, his clothes still hung from pegs on the wall. She opened his trunk, discovering personal items letters, a pocket watch, a daguerreotype of her mother as a young woman. At the bottom of the trunk lay a leather-bound journal. Harlow lit another lamp and settled on the bed to read. The journal chronicled her father's years in Arizona Territory, his struggles with the land, his hopes for the future. And to her surprise, numerous mentions of Isaiah Kincaid. April 18, 1883. Young Kincaid arrived today with a proposal for water sharing. Intelligent plan, must admit. But can't trust him after what happened with Caroline. Some betrayals cut too deep. Caroline. Harlow frowned. Who was Caroline and what betrayal was her father referencing? She read on, finding scattered mentions but no clear explanation until the entry dated November 30, 1883. Saw Caroline in town today with Kincaid. 3 years since she left me for him, and the wound still feels fresh. How can I share water with the man who stole my intended wife? Pride won't allow it, though sense might dictate otherwise. Harlow stared at the words, shocked. Her father had been engaged before marrying her mother, and his fiancée had left him for Isaiah Kincaid. This explained the animosity, and why Kincaid had been reluctant to discuss the ancient history between them. Further entries revealed more. Caroline had eventually left Kincaid too, moving to California with another man. The betrayal had wounded both men, but their pride had prevented reconciliation. December 15, 1885, less than 3 months before his death, her father had written. Kincaid approached again about water. Offered fair terms. Perhaps it's time to bury old grievances. None of us are getting younger and Caroline is long gone. We'll consider his proposal after winter, but he died before spring arrived, leaving the dispute unresolved. Harlow closed the journal, her mind racing. The water conflict hadn't been about water at all, or at least, not entirely. It had been about wounded pride and old hurts. She slept fitfully, waking to the sound of movement in the outer room. Dawn light filtered through the window as she wrapped her father's quilt around her shoulders and opened the bedroom door. Kincaid stood at the stove, boiling coffee. He'd clearly been up for some time, his hair damp as though recently washed. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said, glancing up. "Thought you might want breakfast before we head back." Harlow nodded, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the intimacy of the situation. She gestured that she needed a moment and retreated to splash water on her face and pin up her hair. When she re-emerged, Kincaid had set the small table with coffee, biscuits, and some kind of egg scramble. "Not much of a cook," he apologized, "but it's edible." The food was better than edible, Harlow discovered. They ate in companionable silence until she reached for her slate. "I found my father's journal last night. He wrote about Caroline." Kincaid froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully. "I see. You should have told me. What good would it have done?" His voice was tight. "It was a lifetime ago. It explains the water dispute." "It wasn't about water at all. Not entirely," he admitted, "though the water issue is real enough." Harlow considered her next words carefully. She wanted truth, not recrimination. "Did you love her?" Kincaid looked away. "I thought I did. I was young and foolish." "She was beautiful and unhappy with your father." He met Harlow's gaze directly. "But she was unhappy with me too. Some people just can't settle." "The last entry suggests my father was considering your water proposal before he died." "Was he?" Kincaid's expression lightened slightly. That's something, at least. What happened to Caroline? Last I heard, she was in San Francisco, married to a shipping merchant. Kincaid shrugged. She wasn't meant for territory life. Unlike you, Harlow wrote impulsively, you belong here. Something changed in Kincaid's eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. Yes, I do, he paused. And you, do you think you could belong here too? The question caught her off guard. Could she? A month ago, she'd have said absolutely not. But now, I'm beginning to see its appeal, she admitted. The ride back to Snowflake was quieter than usual, both of them lost in thought. As they reached town, Kincaid said, I have business in Holbrook tomorrow. Won't be back for 3 days. Harlow nodded, surprised by her disappointment. She'd grown accustomed to his daily presence, his patient teachings, the way he seemed to understand her even without words. Jenkins will check the property daily, Kincaid assured her. And I've arranged for Mrs. Hollister's nephew to drive you out if you wish to visit. She wrote, Thank you. Be safe. His smile was warm. Always am, Miss Newman. The 3 days of Kincaid's absence dragged interminably. Harlow visited her ranch once with young Tommy Hollister, but the place felt empty somehow. She busied herself with planning improvements to the cabin, studying her father's ledgers, and continuing her recovery exercises prescribed by Dr. Simmons. On the evening of the 3rd day, she attempted to speak aloud for the first time in weeks. Alone in her room, she formed simple words, pushing air past her damaged vocal cords. The results were discouraging, barely audible rasps that bore little resemblance to speech. Frustration and loneliness overwhelmed her. She sat on her bed and allowed herself rare tears. Would she ever speak again? Would she forever be relegated to slates and gestures, never able to express herself fully? A knock at her door startled her. She wiped her eyes hastily before opening it to find Mrs. Hollister. Mr. Kincaid's downstairs, the widow announced. Says he has news that can't wait. Heart suddenly racing, Harlow quickly smoothed her hair and followed Mrs. Hollister downstairs. Kincaid stood in the parlor, hat in hand, trail dust still clinging to his clothes. His expression was grave. Miss Newman, he said with a nod. Forgive the intrusion, but there's a situation you should know about immediately. Harlow grabbed her slate from the side table. What's happened? Holloway filed a claim with the territorial office in Holbrook. He's challenging your water rights, claiming your father's dam was built on public land, not Newman property. Harlow's stomach dropped. What does that mean for Whispering Pines? If Holloway wins, he controls your water. Without water, the ranch is worthless, Harlow finished for him. Kincaid nodded grimly. Exactly, and he's convinced the land commissioner to visit next week to assess the claim. How do we fight this? I've already engaged a lawyer in Holbrook. We need to find your father's original land grant documents. They should specify the creek boundaries. Harlow frowned. Where would those be? That's what we need to figure out. Not in the cabin, I've searched thoroughly. Maybe with Perkins, we'll check tomorrow. Thank you for riding straight here. Kincaid's expression softened. I promise to look after your interests, Miss Newman. I keep my promises. The urgency of the water claim overshadowed everything else in the coming days. They searched Mr. Perkins' records, the county clerk's office, and every inch of the cabin, finding nothing conclusive. The original land grant documentation seemed to have vanished. There's one place we haven't looked, Kincaid said 4 days into their search. They were at Whispering Pines, having exhausted every obvious location. Your father had a hidden safe. He mentioned it once, said only he knew its location. Harlow raised her eyebrows. Where? That's the problem. He never said. Kincaid ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Think, Miss Newman. Would he have told you, even indirectly? Harlow considered, trying to recall every letter, every conversation. Her father had been cautious but not secretive, if he had a hiding place. She snapped her fingers suddenly, gesturing for Kincaid to follow her to the bookshelf. She pulled down several volumes until she found what she was looking for: Robinson Crusoe, her father's favorite. Inside the front cover, he'd written, "The island holds more treasures than appear on the surface." Kincaid read over her shoulder. An island, the Creek Island. Where the dam is built. They rode immediately to the small island formed where Whispering Creek split around a rocky outcropping. The dam bridged one channel, creating a deeper pool that fed the irrigation channels to Whispering Pine's southern fields. "Your father rebuilt this dam every spring," Kincaid explained as they dismounted. "Said the winter floods always damaged it." Harlow examined the structure carefully. It was solid stonework, more permanent-looking than something that would need annual rebuilding. She pointed this out to Kincaid. "You're right," he admitted, studying it more closely. "This doesn't look seasonal. It's engineered to last." They inspected the dam from all angles. Nothing seemed unusual until Harlow noticed a stone with faint markings, what looked like the letter T carved into its surface. She tugged at Kincaid's sleeve, pointing. "Good eye," he said, bending to examine it. "This stone's different from the others, smoother." He pressed against it experimentally. Nothing happened at first, then with increased pressure, the stone moved inward with a grinding sound. A small cavity appeared behind it, revealing a metal box. "Your father was cleverer than I gave him credit for," Kincaid murmured, carefully extracting the box. It was locked, but the key hung on a chain inside the cavity. They sat on the bank to examine the contents: several folded documents, including the original land grant. Harlow spread it out, searching for the boundary specifications. There, in clear legal language, was proof that Whispering Creek, including both channels around the island, fell entirely within Newman property. Kincaid whistled softly. "This settles it. Holloway doesn't have a claim." Harlow's relief was palpable, but something else caught her eye: another document, this one in her father's handwriting. It was dated just days before his death. "A revised water-sharing agreement," Kincaid read, his voice betraying his shock. "Between Thomas Newman and Isaiah Kincaid." He signed it. He looked up at Harlow. "He never told me he'd accepted my proposal." The agreement was fair and detailed: alternating water flow during dry months, shared maintenance responsibilities, mutual access rights. At the bottom, a personal note. "Isaiah pride kept me silent too long. Let water flow between us again as neighbors should." Thomas Kincaid stared at the note, emotion playing across his features. "He never delivered it. I never knew." Harlow touched his arm gently, drawing his attention to her slate. "He wanted to make peace." "Yes," Kincaid said softly. "And now, perhaps, we can honor that intention." The land commissioner's visit the following week was brief and conclusive. With the original grant documents and a survey of the property boundaries, Holloway's claim was dismissed. The man departed in ill humor, muttering about Eastern influence and Kincaid's tricks. Celebration seemed in order. Kincaid suggested a small gathering at Whispering Pines to properly introduce you to the neighboring ranchers as Thomas Newman's rightful heir. Harlow agreed, though the prospect of socializing without a voice intimidated her. How would she manage conversations, introductions, the 100 small interactions that required speech? The evening of the gathering, Harlow stood before her mirror, adjusting the simple but elegant blue dress she'd brought from Boston. Her reflection showed a woman changed by the past week's sun-kissed skin, a stronger frame from daily ranch work, and eyes that held new confidence despite her continued silence. Mrs. Hollister appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Kincaid's wagon is here, dear." My, don't you look lovely? Harlow smiled her thanks and grabbed her slate and reticule. Downstairs, Kincaid waited in his best clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that brought out the blue of his eyes. He stared at her for a moment before remembering his manners. "Miss Newman, you look beautiful." His voice held genuine appreciation. "Ready to meet your neighbors," she nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. The drive to Whispering Pines passed quickly, Kincaid pointing out which lands belonged to which ranchers they'd be meeting. As they approached her property, Harlow gasped in surprise. Lanterns hung from the porch and nearby trees, casting a warm glow over the yard. Flowers decorated the tables set up outside, and delicious smells wafted from a cooking fire where meat roasted. Several wagons and horses already stood in the yard, guests arriving. "Nothing fancy," Kincaid said, watching her reaction, "but I thought you deserved a proper welcome." Tears pricked Harlow's eyes. She squeezed his hand in gratitude, unable to express how much the gesture meant to her. The evening progressed better than Harlow could have hoped. Kincaid stayed close, smoothly interpreting her gestures and slate notes for others. Most of the ranching families were kind and curious rather than judgmental about her silence, and several of the women promised to visit her in town. After dinner, someone produced a fiddle and impromptu dancing began in the yard. Harlow watched from the porch, enjoying the music and laughter. Kincaid appeared at her side, offering a cup of punch. "Not dancing, Miss Newman," she wrote. "Hard to follow steps without hearing calls." "True enough." He settled beside her on the porch step. "You've handled tonight admirably. These people respect you already." "They do, of course. You stood your ground against Holloway, managed your property decisively, and didn't run back east at the first sign of trouble. That counts for something out here." They watched the dancers in companionable silence. Finally, Harlow wrote something she'd been considering for days. "I've decided to stay permanently. Make Whispering Pines my home." Kincaid's expression brightened. "I hoped you might. The territory needs more people with your determination. And your water-sharing agreement remains in effect. I appreciate that." He hesitated. "Though I should warn you, I'm still interested in expanding the Double K. Might make you an offer someday." Harlow smiled, writing, "I might refuse." His laugh was warm. "I expect nothing less, Miss Newman." As the party wound down and guests departed with warm farewells, Harlow felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since arriving in Arizona. These people, practical, hardworking, direct, were becoming her community. And Isaiah Kincaid, once her presumed adversary, was becoming something else entirely. He insisted on driving her back to town despite the late hour. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the vast sky above them. Halfway to Snowflake, he stopped the wagon on a rise overlooking the valley. "Look there," he said, pointing to where moonlight silvered the distant mountains. "Spring snow still on the peaks. That's what feeds Whispering Creek year-round. As long as those mountains stand, your land will have water." The beauty of it caught in Harlow's throat. She'd never seen landscape like this in Boston, wild, vast, and somehow both harsh and nurturing at once. "You miss your voice?" Kincaid asked suddenly, his question catching her off guard. Harlow considered before writing, "Every day. But I've learned there are other ways to speak." "There are indeed." His eyes met hers in the moonlight. "Your silence has taught me to listen better, to watch for meaning beyond words." A warmth spread through Harlow that had nothing to do with the mild night. She wrote, "What do you see when you look at me?" Kincaid studied her face. "Strength. Intelligence. A woman finding her place in a new world." His voice softened. "Beauty, inside and out." Harlow's heart pounded. She hadn't expected this turn in their relationship, hadn't allowed herself to consider it. Yet here it was, undeniable in the way he looked at her, in the way her own pulse quickened at his nearness. Before she could respond, a shooting star blazed across the sky, leaving a trail of light that faded slowly. "Make a wish," Kincaid murmured. Harlow closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, he was still watching her, his expression unguarded. "I should get you back to town," he said, though he made no move to take up the reins. "Mrs. Hollister will have my hide for keeping you out so late." Harlow nodded reluctantly. The spell broken, they continued toward Snowflake in silence, though something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither had voiced. At the boarding house door, Kincaid helped her down from the wagon. "I'll come by tomorrow about the new fence line, if that's agreeable." She nodded, then impulsively wrote, "Thank you for everything tonight." "My pleasure, Miss Newman." He hesitated. "Harlow, may I call you Harlow?" She nodded, warmth spreading through her at the simple intimacy of hearing her given name on his lips. "Good night, Harlow," he said softly. "Sleep well." 2 more weeks passed, bringing changes to both Whispering Pines and its owner. Harlow moved permanently into the cabin, despite Mrs. Hollister's concerns about propriety. Sheriff Mills supported her decision, pointing out that several other women in the county managed ranches alone. "Besides," he added with a knowing look, "Kincaid's men are always within shouting distance. Not that you can shout yet." Her voice was returning, though slowly. "Doctor." Simmons was encouraged by her progress. She could now produce whispered words that were mostly intelligible if the listener was close and attentive. The relationship between Harlow and Kincaid evolved too, moving from cautious cooperation to genuine partnership. They worked side by side on ranch improvements, planned seasonal operations together, and often shared evening meals on her porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky. One evening in late July, as they reviewed breeding records for her small cattle herd, a summer thunderstorm blew in from the mountains. Lightning cracked across the darkened sky, followed by a boom of thunder that rattled the cabin windows. "Should check the horses," Kincaid said, rising from the table. "They get skittish in storms." Harlow nodded, following him outside. Rain hadn't started yet, but the air smelled of moisture and electricity. They hurried to the barn, where the horses indeed paced nervously in their stalls. "Easy, girl," Kincaid murmured to Penny, who tossed her head at another thunderclap. "Just noise, nothing to fear." Harlow stroked her mare's neck, whispering soothing sounds that weren't quite words. The simple presence of humans seemed to calm the animals. "Storm's moving fast," Kincaid observed, looking out the barn door. "Might bring flash flooding. We should check the dam." They saddled 2 horses quickly and rode toward the creek, racing the approaching storm. The sky had darkened to an ominous purple-black, and wind whipped through the trees with increasing force. At the creek, they found water already rising, fed by distant mountain rainfall. The dam held firm, but debris had begun collecting against its upstream side. "We need to clear that," Kincaid shouted over the wind. "If it blocks the flow, pressure could damage the structure." They worked quickly, Kincaid wading into the swelling creek to dislodge branches while Harlow used a long pole to guide the debris through the spillway. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they finished, quickly becoming a deluge that soaked them to the skin. "Back to the cabin," Kincaid called, helping Harlow onto her horse. They rode hard through the downpour, reaching the cabin as lightning split a nearby pine with a tremendous crack. Inside, Harlow shivered in her soaked clothes while Kincaid built up the fire. "You should change," he said, not looking at her. "I'll wait outside." Harlow shook her head, gesturing to the storm. She scrawled quickly on her slate, "Don't be ridiculous. Turn your back." Kincaid did as instructed, facing the fire while Harlow slipped behind the bedroom door. She changed into dry clothes, a simple skirt and shirtwaist, and toweled her hair as best she could. When she emerged, Kincaid had removed his sodden vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, though his shirt still clung damply to his broad shoulders. "Storm's settling in," he observed, glancing out the window where rain lashed against the glass. "Might have to wait it out." The implication hung between them he would need to stay until the storm passed. Propriety dictated concern, but Harlow found she didn't care. She trusted Isaiah Kincaid more than any man she'd ever known. She built a simple meal from her pantry store's beans, cornbread, and coffee. They ate in companionable silence broken only by the storm's percussion on the roof. Afterward, Kincaid insisted on washing the dishes while Harlow tended the fire. "Your father built this cabin well," he remarked as wind howled outside. "Snug against any weather." Harlow nodded, then approached him with her slate. "Tell me about when you first came here." Kincaid settled into a chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Not much to tell. Left Missouri with nothing but my horse and saddle. Worked cattle drives for 2 years, saved every penny. Bought 100 acres of what folks called worthless land too far from water. How did you make it work? Dug wells. Built catchments for rain. Worked dawn to dusk, slept under the stars until I could afford lumber for a cabin." His mouth quirked. "Wasn't much of a cabin at first. More like a lean-to with ambitions." Harlow smiled, picturing it. She wrote, "You built an empire from nothing. Wouldn't call it an empire, just a decent spread, enough to pass on someday. To children." Harlow wrote, then immediately felt forward for asking. "If I'm fortunate enough to have them," Kincaid replied evenly. "Need a wife first, of course." The air between them seemed to thicken. Harlow busied herself adding wood to the fire, aware of his eyes on her back. "And you?" he asked after a moment. "Did you leave suitors behind in Boston?" She turned, shaking her head. "Hard to believe. Beautiful, educated woman like you." Harlow flushed at the compliment. She wrote, "I was considered too independent-minded, not a desirable quality in Boston society." "Their loss," Kincaid said simply. "Out here, independent thinking keeps you alive." Thunder crashed directly overhead, making Harlow jump. Kincaid rose instinctively, moving to her side. "Just the storm," he said softly. "Nothing to fear." But it wasn't fear that quickened Harlow's breath as he stood close beside her. In the flickering firelight, his blue eyes held an intensity that made her heart race. She could smell the rain on his skin, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Harlow," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "I should go to the barn before this becomes inappropriate." She shook her head, gathering her courage. With trembling fingers, she touched his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her hand. Then, summoning all her concentration, she forced a whisper past her damaged vocal cords. "Stay." The single word hung between them, fragile but clear. Kincaid's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with emotion. "You spoke," he murmured, raising a hand to gently cup her cheek. "Your first word to me." Harlow nodded, leaning into his touch. She tried again, each word an effort but worth the strain. "I want you to stay." Kincaid's smile was radiant. "Then I'll stay." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "May I kiss you, Harlow Newman?" Her answer was to rise on tiptoes, bringing her lips to his. The kiss began gently, a tentative exploration, then deepened as Kincaid's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him. Harlow felt herself melting into his embrace, all the tension and longing of the past weeks crystallizing into this perfect moment. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kincaid rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you stumbled against me by the North Ridge." Harlow smiled, whispering, "I know, your eyes told me." Did they now? He chuckled softly. And here I thought I was being subtle. She shook her head, then kissed him again, reveling in the freedom to express her feelings without words or slate. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, something beautiful and tender bloomed between them, as natural and inevitable as the seasons changing. Later, as they sat before the fire, Harlow nestled against Kincaid's side, his arm around her shoulders. The storm had quieted to a steady rainfall drumming soothingly on the roof. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Harlow considered the question. With painful effort she formed the words, "We build something together. I'd like that." He kissed the top of her head. "Very much." In the morning, Kincaid rode with Harlow into town to speak with Dr. Simmons. The physician was delighted with her progress. "The vocal cords are healing well," he proclaimed after examining her throat. "Continue the exercises. Speak a little more each day, but don't strain. Within another month, you should regain most of your voice." The news heartened them both. As they left the doctor's office, Kincaid said, "This calls for a celebration. Dinner at the hotel restaurant." Harlow nodded happily, then pointed to Mr. Perkins' office across the street. "Water agreement," she whispered. "Formalize it." "Good thinking," Kincaid agreed. "Let's make it official." Mr. Perkins was surprised but pleased to prepare the formal documents based on Thomas Newman's draft. "Your father would approve," he told Harlow as she signed her name beside Kincaid's. He valued fairness, even when pride got in his way. By late August, Harlow's voice had returned almost completely. She still tired after extended conversation, but the improvement was remarkable. Even more remarkable was the transformation of Whispering Pines under her management. With Kincaid's guidance, she'd implemented modern ranching techniques, expanded the cattle operation, and hired 2 full-time hands. Their courtship progressed openly, with Kincaid calling at the cabin several evenings a week and escorting Harlow to church and community gatherings. The town buzzed with speculation about when an engagement might be announced. "Let them talk," Kincaid said when Harlow mentioned the gossip. "I'm in no hurry. We're still learning each other." But Harlow could see in his eyes that he was simply waiting for the right moment. Their feelings had grown deeper and more certain with each passing day. That moment came on a crisp September evening. Kincaid had invited Harlow to the Double K for the first time to see how the other half lives, he'd teased. His ranch house surprised her, not the rustic cabin she'd expected, but a substantial 2-story home built of local stone and timber. Inside, the furnishings were simple but of good quality, with bookshelves lining one wall of the main room. "You read?" Harlow exclaimed, examining the well-used volumes. "Don't sound so surprised," Kincaid laughed. "I may be a cowboy, but I'm not uncultured." He gave her a tour of the house, which included 3 bedrooms upstairs for future expansions, he said with a meaningful glance that made Harlow blush. They ate dinner on the wide back porch overlooking the valley. As twilight deepened, Kincaid grew uncharacteristically quiet. "Is something wrong?" Harlow asked, her voice still slightly husky but clear. "Nothing's wrong." He took her hand across the table. "In fact, everything's right for the first time in my life." He rose, pulling her gently to her feet, then to her surprise lowered himself to one knee. "Harlow Newman, I've known from the moment you stood up to me in Mrs. Hollister's parlor that you were unlike any woman I'd ever met. Your strength, your determination, your intelligence, everything about you captivates me." His voice deepened with emotion. "When you lost your voice, I learned to read your heart in your eyes. Even in silence, you spoke to me. And now I'm asking if you'll speak one particular word." He produced a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Harlow's eyes. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice strong and certain. "Yes, Isaiah Kincaid, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to gather her in his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of lasting devotion. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "When?" he asked simply. "Before winter," Harlow decided. "I don't want to wait." They were married in Snowflake's white-steepled church on the first weekend of October, with the surrounding hills ablaze in autumn colors. The entire county turned out for the celebration, even crusty old Holloway offering grudging congratulations. "Never thought I'd see the day Kincaid settled down," Sheriff Mills remarked at the reception. "You've worked a miracle, Mrs. Kincaid." Harlow smiled at her new name, watching her husband across the room as he chatted with neighbors. "Not a miracle, Sheriff. Just the right person at the right time." They divided their time between both ranches, eventually building a new house on the ridge between their properties, neutral territory. Isaiah joked. The water-sharing agreement became a model for other ranchers in the area, and their combined operations flourished. The following spring, as wildflowers carpeted the valley in a riot of color, Harlow had news for her husband. She found him by the creek, supervising improvements to the dam her father had built. "Isaiah," she called, her voice now fully restored and strong. "I have something to tell you." He turned, smiling at the sight of her. "What is it, love? We'll need to finish the nursery sooner than planned." She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "By Christmas, there will be 3 of us." Isaiah's face transformed with wonder. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, lifting her off her feet in a joyous embrace. "A baby, you're certain?" "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday," she laughed as he set her down gently. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He knelt suddenly, pressing his ear to her midsection. "Hello in there, little one. Your mama and papa can't wait to meet you." Harlow ran her fingers through his hair, heart overflowing with contentment. "I was thinking if it's a boy, perhaps Thomas after my father." Isaiah looked up, eyes shining. "Thomas Kincaid, it's perfect." He stood, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "And if it's a girl, Caroline," Harlow said softly, to lay old ghosts to rest. Emotion flickered across Isaiah's face. "You would do that, name our child after someone who, in a roundabout way, brought us together. Without that old conflict, you and my father might never have crossed paths. I might never have come west." She smiled. "Sometimes life's strangest detours lead exactly where we're meant to be." Isaiah kissed her deeply. "How did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," Harlow replied. "It was fever that stole my voice, and the man who learned to hear me anyway." Their son, Thomas Isaiah Kincaid, was born on a snowy December night, healthy and strong-lunged. As Harlow cradled him in the bedroom of their ridge house, Isaiah sat beside them, all written across his features. "He has your eyes," he murmured, touching the infant's tiny hand, "and hopefully your brains." "And your strength," Harlow added. "He'll need it for this life." Outside, snow blanketed their joined lands. Whispering Creek flowed steadily beneath a crust of ice, and stars glittered in the clear night sky. Inside, the family Isaiah and Harlow had created kept warm against the winter, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Arizona Territory itself. In the years that followed, that promise flourished. 2 more children joined the family: Caroline Rose 2 years later, and James Henry 2 years after that. The Kincaid Newman Ranch grew to become one of the most successful operations in the territory, known for progressive methods and fair dealings. Harlow never regretted her decision to stay in Arizona. The fever that had stolen her voice had, in the end, given her something far greater: a love that heard her even in silence, a home where she truly belonged, and a future built on understanding that ran deeper than words could express. And Isaiah, who had once been content with solitude, found in Harlow a partner who challenged, supported, and loved him completely. Together, they created a legacy that would endure long after them, founded on the principle that sometimes the truest communication comes not from what is said, but from what is understood between hearts.